My father-in-law is refusing to allow my daughter's boyfriend, who lives with her and is being treated as family by us, to sleep in his house during the holidays for unknown reasons, and it is ruining Christmas. Posted by u/goofusmalufus6. For background, our daughter, 23F, and her boyfriend, let's call him Dan, 24M, moved in together in August. It was fast, they'd only been together for 6 months, but they're old enough to make that decision and are discussing marriage. I fully believe they're going to end up together. Dan had to move away for training this month, so they're going to be long distance for a little while, but plan to live together as soon as they're in the same city again. Now, my father-in-law can be a lot. He's your typical rich old white guy who's used to getting his way. He and my mother-in-law visited my daughter in November, and for some reason, my father-in-law took an unreasonable dislike to Dan. No reason was given, he just doesn't like him. Personally, I think it may be because they moved in together so quickly or because Dan is a person of color. Our family is white, but my father-in-law would never admit it. So here's where it gets sticky. Dan will be spending Christmas with our immediate family at our house. His parents will be away, and he was going to be alone, so of course we invited him to stay with us. As far as we're concerned, he's going to be family, and we treat him as such. Now, my in-laws live about 2 hours away. Typically, we would do an overnight visit at their house for the holidays, and we're planning one when we invited Dan to stay with us. My partner was on the phone with his dad, ironing out details, and he told his father about Dan staying with us. My partner was very careful to say he understood that it was his parents' decision whether they wanted to include Dan or not. It honestly never occurred to me that they'd leave him out. Well, my father-in-law had a hissy fit. Said he didn't want that boy, he's 24, in his house. Didn't discuss it with his wife, who loves Dan, just flat out refused to include him. My partner, and I'm so proud of him for this, told his dad that Dan would be staying with us and part of our holiday plans. He agreed that, of course, his dad had a right to decide who to have in his home, and he wasn't going to push. He suggested his parents could talk about it separately, like not while on the phone with him, before making any final decisions. Then he suggested that if my father-in-law truly didn't want Dan in his house, we could all meet for lunch or dinner halfway between our houses, all including Dan. It did not go over well. My father-in-law immediately became defensive and snapped about how it was his house and his choice, and he didn't need to talk to his wife. His word was final. Aha, he's that guy. The hilarious part to me is my in-laws are devout Christians. So much for the season of love and acceptance, right? Anyway, my dilemma is how to address this with our daughter and Dan. I'm furious and disgusted with my father-in-law's behavior, and if it were up to me, I'd tell her exactly what her grandfather said and that he told us Dan isn't welcome. But my partner says he'd rather just tell our daughter the overnight visit didn't work out so she doesn't get mad at her grandparents. I disagree. I think she should know the truth and get mad if she wants to. I know I am. So my question is this. How would you address it with your daughter? Personally, I don't care if she gets angry because of the truth, but these aren't my parents, and I want to respect my partner as well. What would you do? /relevant comments. Commenter. If she's adult enough to live with Dan, she's adult enough to hear the truth about what her grandfather said. An added bonus is that it means she'll be better prepared for any additional fallout from your father-in-law if they proceed to an engagement and/or eventual wedding. Don't embellish anything, just present the truth. Your father-in-law has indicated he doesn't want Dan to join the family for Christmas. That means that you're not going to your father-in-law's house for the day, and are trying to arrange a lunch or dinner meetup somewhere in between both homes. Once a decision has been made, you'll give your daughter and Dan an update. Commenter 2. Exactly, your daughter has a right to know how much her grandpa hates her partner. Has your husband spoken to his mother, as she has a say too? Your daughter has lots of decisions going forward regarding her grandpa's presence at things if she stays with Dan. Weddings, christenings, being involved with their children's lives, etc. Ops response. No, Hubs hasn't talked to his mom about it yet. Unfortunately, she tends to support her husband's decisions in public, but has been known to disagree in private. I'm hoping she's working on this in the background, but because it's my husband's family, I'm not comfortable going around him to talk to her. We're generally your parents, you handle it, people. Commenter 3. It's really worrying that your partner doesn't respect his own adult daughter enough to tell her the truth about something that directly involves and affects her. He cares more about his father's reputation. I would tell your partner that she's either going to hear it from him or from you, but she is going to hear it by the end of the day, so he better decide. Ops response. My partner says he's protecting her by not telling her the whole truth. His plan is to just say the overnight didn't work out. I know my daughter is going to ask why, and at that point it's going to come out anyway. That's why I want to tell her. Adds an edit to her post. My partner and I are married, I just tend to call them my partner instead of husband. Also, I should add that my father-in-law does refer to my brother-in-law as that boy as well, and my brother-in-law is white. That's part of why I'm not sure my father-in-law's dislike of Dan is race-related. Because it's coming up a lot, we aren't going to the in-laws even if my father-in-law changes his mind. Lunch is still being debated. Update 2 days later. I've gotten a lot more responses to my first post than I expected, so I thought I should update. Since my original post, I've had several conversations with my husband, none of which have gone well. I've explained I'm not comfortable with the lie of omission, only telling our daughter the date didn't work out, and I feel she should be told to ask her grandfather why we won't be going. My husband still disagrees. He maintains that he's protecting her. I'm still arguing that he's protecting his father, and therefore rewarding his behavior. He argues that my in-laws missing our overnight visit is the consequence. I finally told him I won't be lying to our daughter. If she asks me why we aren't going, I'm going to tell her she needs to talk to her grandfather about that. He can explain his decision to her. While I want to simply tell her father-in-law said Dan isn't welcome, I'm not doing his dirty work for him. Frankly, I'm going to make sure she asks me because I'm not okay with her and Dan attending a lunch with someone who doesn't approve of Dan. It doesn't matter what my father-in-law's reasoning is, she has a right to know, and he has a responsibility to tell her himself. She can then make an informed decision about whether they want to attend. And even more honestly, if they don't go, I don't go. She needs to know I back her unreservedly. Right now, things at home are icy between my husband and I have no idea how this will turn out. I'll update again once there's more info. Top/relevant comments. Commenter. You're right that your husband is protecting his father rather than his daughter, and that is going to be a much bigger long-term problem. It's possible that your husband privately agrees with his father, which is why he's protecting him. You need to get to the bottom of why your husband is taking this line. If it turns out that he's secretly racist, that is going to have massive ramifications for your marriage and family. Don't wait for your daughter to ask. She's a grown-up, she can handle hearing about who her grandfather really is. Give her the respect of telling her outright what has been going on. Let the chips fall where they may for your husband and his father. Commenter 2. Me reading the update, is there a racial component to this? Me reading the original post, Dan is a person of color. Yeah, your daughter needs to know that her grandpa is a racist. Dan doesn't need to be anywhere near that guy. And husband is probably racist too. Second update 1 day later. My mind is still blown by the number of people who've read these posts. At the moment it's over 1 million. I had no idea people would be so invested in this stupid little story of family drama. But I'm still getting a lot of messages, so I thought I'd add what's happened in the last day. I haven't had a chance to talk to my daughter yet. We were supposed to chat yesterday but weren't able to, so that conversation is on hold. I did, however, talk to my husband again. We got a lot deeper into his thinking on what's happening, and I have to say I was surprised. He's more upset than I thought he was about the situation. He was very angry at his father. The fact that my father-in-law apparently rejected Dan for no good reason infuriates him. He confirmed he, my husband himself, likes Dan and didn't understand why his father was acting this way, so no, my husband doesn't share his father's views. My husband talked about how hard it's been all his life to have to be the mediator in his family. As many suspected, this is a role he's played for a long time. It's always been his job to pat things down between his parents, between his siblings and parents, even between his parents and I. My husband's family is extremely conflict avoidant, and somehow he took on the responsibility for keeping it to a minimum between family members. He hates it but says he feels stuck. I knew this about them but didn't realize just how bad it was. So we talked about it, and I think both of us felt better afterwards. But that's not the real update. Apparently, after our last conversation he did talk to his dad again. I know a bunch of you are waiting in the wings to scream father-in-law's a racist. And I'm sorry to disappoint, but that isn't the problem. And no, Dan, our daughter's boyfriend, isn't a con man and didn't say anything unforgivable. My father-in-law is just a grumpy old man who thinks young people shouldn't be living in sin. That's a direct quote. Now, before anyone suggests my father-in-law is lying, because I thought that too, my husband did ask his dad directly if the fact that Dan is a person of color had anything to do with his dislike. When I suggested this as a possibility to my husband, he didn't think so but wasn't 100% sure. Well, apparently my father-in-law was horrified. He asked my husband if he'd said or done anything to give us or Dan that idea. And when we talked about it after their conversation yesterday, frankly neither of us could come up with anything specific other than the boy comment, that my father-in-law didn't want that boy to come for Christmas. As I said in my other posts, that was my suspicion, and I take full responsibility for it. In my head, I put too much emphasis on my father-in-law calling Dan that boy, assuming it was racist. As I said in both my other posts, my father-in-law refers to my white brother-in-law as that boy as well, so I'm the one who added the meaning, and I'm the one who suggested it to my husband. I feel awful. And I apologize if I misled anyone, that was never my intention. I really did think my father-in-law could be a bigot. I'm ashamed, to be honest, because it was one stupid sentence in almost 30 years of knowing him. I made a mistake, and I've apologized to my husband. And yes, I'll apologize to my father-in-law. While they were talking, my father-in-law actually offered to speak directly to Dan and our daughter if they thought this, and my husband explained that no, we were the ones who suspected his issue could be racially motivated. His dad is, understandably, angry that we could think that of him. I have damage control to do. I'll be calling my father-in-law today to apologize for that and talk about what's happening. But back to the reason my father-in-law doesn't want Dan in his house for Christmas. He doesn't approve of Dan and our daughter living together. He says they're too young, it was too fast, and since they aren't even engaged it isn't appropriate. As I've said before, my in-laws are devout Christians, so the living in sin aspect is very real to them. I swear the man is still living in the 60s. But that's his main issue. As an extension of that, he thinks they moved in together too quickly. I can see why he'd think that, they only dated for 6 months before. But they've been together for a year now and are talking about marriage. My daughter says it will happen, they're just waiting until they're both finished their training, both already have degrees, this is professional training, to make it official. My father-in-law didn't know that. In addition, my father-in-law was under the impression that Dan had been freeloading off our daughter because when my in-laws visited them, Dan didn't have a job. Well, Dan was paying his own way with his savings while he waited for his full-time vocational training to start. Dan's actually moved for that, so he and our daughter will be long distance until he starts his, very secure, full-time job. My father-in-law didn't know that either. So does he approve of Dan now? No. He's still got to stick up his nether regions that they were living together before marriage. Is he now willing to host Dan for the overnight visit? Also no. He still disapproves of their choices. Is he a racist jerk? Also no, just an old-fashioned 80-year-old who doesn't understand the world has changed. That's where we stand. We still aren't going to the in-laws for Christmas. Dan still isn't welcome at my in-laws, but now we know why. And what are we going to say to our daughter? The truth. That her grandfather isn't comfortable having Dan stay overnight when they aren't engaged. That it's his house, and we have to respect that. That we're going to try to meet for lunch instead, and she and Dan are welcome to join us, and we'll let them decide. I'll be suggesting she talk to her grandfather directly. I don't know if I'll be updating again. It depends on how the conversations with my daughter and father-in-law go. Thanks everyone for reading. /relevant comments. Commenter. I've been following since your first post, and I'm really relieved the old farts problem is old-fashioned crap instead of racism. I see why the boy comment got you thinking that way, but the fact that he calls your white brother-in-law boy too makes sense. It's the stupid way of talking some older guys have, especially old white guys. It's not very nice, but it isn't necessarily racist. I'm also glad you and your hubby talked. This is the kind of crap that can pull families apart. Hope the talk with your father-in-law and daughter goes well. Update me. Commenter 2. Did you and your husband not date or live together before marriage? It's his house at the end of the day, but I smell some BS. And I agree with everyone else saying to quit lying to your daughter. Ops response. We did live together. We actually moved in together after less than 4 months and got engaged a year later, married a year after that. Until we were married, even after living together and getting engaged, we weren't allowed to sleep in the same room at my in-laws. So this is not a new attitude, I was just surprised that even almost 30 years later, he still thinks the same way. And we are going to tell her the truth, it says so above. Commenter 3. So, if they get married, will he finally approve of Dan? Ops response. I don't know. I hope, if my father-in-law is around that long, he'll get to know him and we'll see what a great guy he is. It'd be nice for our daughter if her grandfather approved, but frankly, whether he does or not won't change anything for her. She's never needed anyone's approval to make these kinds of decisions. Pretty proud of her for that. Mama brag for the day. Third update 13 hours later. This will be the final update in the saga of the Great Christmas in-law invite debacle. First, the conversation with my father-in-law, it was short and, mostly, cordial. I apologize for assuming his boy comment meant he had an issue with a person of color dating his granddaughter. I explained that the term is often considered a slur against people of color, hence my reaction. He grudgingly accepted my apology. He pointed out that that's what he calls my brother-in-law too, who, incidentally, is white, and he didn't think it meant anything other than a male younger than himself. As a few people suggested, I pointed out that even if he didn't intend it to be an insult, it still was one. He sounded surprised and asked if I thought my brother-in-law was offended when he called him that. I asked if he'd ever called brother-in-law that to his face, and he went very quiet. So I pointed out that if he didn't think it was an insult, why didn't he openly call my brother-in-law that? He sort of harumphed and muttered something about how people are too sensitive. But I'm pretty sure he got it. We moved on. I then asked if Dan was welcome in his house at all or just not overnight. That really seemed to surprise him because he said of course Dan could visit, just not sleep over. So that was a relief. He then said that we jumped to suggesting a lunch so quickly, he didn't have a chance to suggest we just visit for the day. Talk about miscommunication. So the call ended with us agreeing that this year meeting in a neutral restaurant was for the best. We would plan better for next year. If Dan's still around, he felt the need to add. But he ended the call by saying he missed us and was looking forward to lunch. So all good there. Then the talk with our daughter. She brought up the visit herself and asked when we were going to her grandparents'. Her dad and I had agreed on our response, which was we were going to meet halfway for lunch instead. She was disappointed and asked why. As gently as possible, I told her not everyone is comfortable with having someone they don't know very well staying in their home. Before I could say anything else about my father-in-law's reaction, she made me laugh by asking if Grandpa still had a stick up his ass about her and Dan living together. Everyone who said she already knew was spot on. Then we had a bit of a giggle about old-fashioned values and how not everyone thinks the way we do. We talked about how people react when a relationship moves so fast, her father's and mine did too, and that attitudes change in time, and that Grandpa just didn't know Dan yet. I let her know I wasn't invited to sleep over until her dad and I were engaged either, and that helped. She laughed and said at least her grandfather's consistent. Then I reminded her that her dad and I support her, and them 100%, and she said she knew that. And that was about it. I'm sure some people will be disappointed that there wasn't a big explosive confrontation where we cut my father-in-law out of our lives because he's a secret member of a white supremacist group. But that's just not what happened. There was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, and some judgmental attitudes, from both my father-in-law and me. We're still going to see my in-laws, and Dan will be coming, it just won't be overnight. And things are okay with us and our daughter, and with us and my father-in-law. As to my father-in-law's relationship with our daughter, we're leaving it to them. This will be the final update because the issue is basically resolved. Thanks again to everyone who commented, yes, even the people who told me I should divorce my bigot husband. That made me laugh a little. And I got some great advice. It was fun to read the responses, and the reaction still blows me away. So cheers, and that's all folks. Merry Christmas to all and to all a good night. /relevant comments. Commenter. Thank you for the update. This is the best possible ending, and it was wonderful to read. Have a wonderful holiday with your family. Commenter 2. Just now joining into the story. Few up, it's been a journey/journal. I understand very well this family issue. My 90-plus dad is one of the most accepting persons on the planet, but he draws a line in the sand if you live together without being married. No wedding present or attendance at your wedding. If you played at being married before the wedding, then he is not going to act like everything is normal in his mind. He just really values the sanctity of marriage and will not accept people doing otherwise.